trying to watch the show live. For any technical difficulties we were having just getting the show up and running. But nonetheless, it's great to have you with us now, where I'm going to talk about what Nancy Pelosi, the traditional Latin Mass, and the transgender issue have in common, which is absolutely nothing. But we're going to talk about all three right here on The Catholic Citizen in just 1 second. All right, brothers and sisters, welcome back to the show. It's great to have you with us. We can't do any show, though, without mentioning Casa Bea Cleaning. Casa Bea is just so important to what we do here. We're so thankful for their support that they've given us from the beginning of the show. They help us keep the lights on. So please patron Casa Bea. If you need help cleaning your home or your office, wherever it may be, Casa Bea Cleaning is the place for you. They're great people and they do great work. Secondly, though, speaking about keeping the lights on, one of the reasons we are having technical difficulties is that we need you to help sponsor the show to keep it going. So I want to thank the three people who have already offered their finances to help sponsor the show. There's all these different perks that you get if you help to sponsor the show, whether that's at the $3 level or all the way up at the $500 level, whatever you feel like is important to keep this show going. So please visit thecatholiccitizen.com. Again, that's thecatholiccitizen.com to become a part of the sponsorship team here at The Catholic Citizen. All right, folks, let's go ahead and get to the show because there's just so much to cover. We're starting the show a little bit late, and I want to make sure we get to these important topics today. All right, as I mentioned, the traditional Latin Mass. So it's in the news a little bit in Catholic circles. Last Friday, July 16th, you may have seen Pope Francis issued an Apostolic Letter concerning the traditional Latin Mass. Now, basically, in short, what this letter does is it places new restrictions on where and by whom the traditional Latin Mass can be celebrated, and requires new permissions from local bishops, even for its use. Now, let me just say from the outset, I am not a liturgical expert at all. I've maybe only been to 2, maybe 3 traditional Latin masses, and I'm still trying to understand what's going on here. So I'm not talking about this from an expertise type perspective. This is just one poor layman's perspective on this particular issue. So if you're a traditional Latin Mass goer, or if you're someone who didn't even hear about this news and you're like, well, why is this even important? Just bear with me here in a moment. I mean, if you go to Luke chapter 24, right, we see this story about Jesus walking with his disciples on the road to Emmaus. And in that story, Jesus opens up the scriptures. He explains the scriptures, and then he breaks the bread. And while breaking the bread, he disappears, but yet the bread remains. It is the blueprint, if you will, of the Mass. It's what we've been celebrating for 2,000 years. So the Mass itself has not changed and will not change. But the particular rites and the way that we celebrate the Mass and we approach the Mass, that's at what is kind of at issue here a little bit. So you have in the church many rites, and the traditional Latin Mass is something that was in existence in the church from very early on, all the way up until Vatican II, when the church moved to using more of the vernacular language, the language of the local people in the liturgy. Now, some great things came of that, and also some negative things came of that. So you have this struggle right now in our church where some people are drawn more back to the traditional Latin Mass, while others, again, don't even know what it is. But let me just make a few points about this issue. Number one, to the average Catholic, and when I say average Catholic, I don't always have the most positive connotation in my mind, unfortunately. I mean, I'm talking about the Catholic that, goes to Mass every once in a while. I mean, that's what we know about the average Catholic. Those who have been baptized, they don't necessarily believe in the real presence of the Eucharist. So to the average Catholic, this letter won't mean much. It should, but it doesn't. It only serves right now of fitting into the already existing narrative that Pope Francis is clamping down on conservatives. So says the New York Times in their article about this particular move. Now, it very well may be, but here's my second thought with this. It seems to me that this is an attempt to fix an issue which doesn't actually exist at all. Pope Francis talks about division here, and in the letter and in the language surrounding this, it's kind of harsh language. So coming from the Pope, who's talking about walking with people, whether they're struggling with, gender identity issues, whatever it may be, there's always this compassion used. But when it comes to talking about traditional Latin Mass goers, it's like hitting them over the stick with the staff. But nonetheless, in all the encounters I've had with those who attend the traditional Latin Mass, all I've encountered is people who love the faith. They love the faith. And yes, I know there's probably some in there in the traditional Latin Mass that just outright reject Vatican II. I haven't met them, but I'm sure there is. Some of the vitriol that's coming from some of the websites of individuals who are involved in traditional Latin, not helping their cause. But that's a very small minority, okay? Most traditional Latin Mass goers that I've talked to are they're very upset. They're disheartened. They're hurt by this particular decision, to say the least. But they're not bashing anybody. But a lot of people, they go to this Mass because maybe their parents insist on it, whatever it may be. But, there's plenty of people who go to the Novus Ordo, or what I'll call, just for the layman's terms, the normal Mass, the Mass that we're used to. There's plenty of people who go to that Mass that don't even know what Vatican II is, let alone understand its implications. And there are people who go to that Mass because their parents making them go to that Mass too. So, third point, the question here for me is, what are the fruits? What are the fruits of those who go to the traditional Latin Mass? And again, I'm not one of them. And what are the fruits of the average Catholic who go to the Novus Ordo, who go to the normal Mass that we know? All right, well, here are the fruits that I've seen from those who go to traditional Latin Mass. Number one, they typically have really large families. They typically have lots of babies. They typically don't follow the culture when it comes to their contraceptive mindset of kids are about us, and I want to have 2 kids, so I'm just going to have 2 kids. They seem to follow the scriptures when it comes to God's command to say, be fruitful and multiply. Number 2, they seem to be people who accept, follow, live, and teach what the church actually teaches. Something that I don't always encounter with those individuals who are identifying as Catholic, going to the normal Catholic Mass. They are people who believe wholeheartedly in the presence, the true presence of Jesus Christ in the Eucharist. In a time in our church where the majority of individuals who go to normal Mass don't believe in the presence of Jesus Christ in the Eucharist, the traditional Latin Mass goers who are there, seems to be no doubt in the reverence that I see them pay to the Eucharist. Another fruit. And look, they're not all saints, but if you ask me who's more likely to know their faith and reverently revere the source and summit of our faith, the traditional Latin Mass attendee or the average Catholic? And again, my limited experience, I'll go with the people who are still falling to their knees when they approach the altar to receive Jesus Christ in the Eucharist. Powerful, powerful experience to go and fall on your knees to receive the Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, in the Eucharist. And every traditional Latin Mass that I've attended, and from what I understand, that's what you do. You fall to your knees before the King of Grace. In the normal Mass we attend, do you see the reverence, even sometimes from priests and deacons, when it comes to handling the Eucharist? There is this casuality about it. Just bread. I'm just tossing it around here a little bit. Like I've mentioned on the show before, there are some amazing priests like Father Kishore at St. Rose. After the distribution of communion is finished, he takes the Eucharist and he holds it above his head as he walks it back to the tabernacle. And there's something special here. So there are priests, praise God, I'm majority probably in our diocese, for example, that revere the Eucharist. But there are priests in our diocese that just treat it like, well, this is just a part of what we're doing here. One final point here. And I take this directly from an article that's posted by Father Albert Betts, just ordained. Congratulations, Father Albert. But he posted an article by retired professor of theology, Dr. Larry Chapp. He taught for 20 years at DeSales University in Center Valley, PA. He's currently the owner and manager of the Dorothy Day Catholic Worker Farm in Harveys Lake, PA. He's someone who criticizes both people on the right and the left of the church. But this is what he wrote. And I'm going to read this at length because I think this is pointing to a broader point that we're missing in the discussion because, again, to the outside world, they're like, the Catholics are fighting about the traditional Latin Mass and the Novus Ordo. Like, they don't even know what we're talking about. I don't even know what we're talking about. So this is, it's getting in the weeds here, but I think there's a larger point that we're all missing as a church right now. And I think Dr. Chapp hits it on the head. So bear with me. He says, quote, "What is lacking is a piercing pastoral analysis of what has brought us to this point in the first place." Excuse me. Why is it that so many Catholics of deep faith have grown weary of the business as usual Catholicism of our parishes and have felt the need to flee to an older iteration of the faith in both liturgy and in theology, and who do so not of nostalgia for a past they never knew, but because they have found something there that rips open their souls with the passion of a lover? So just to pause here just for a moment. He's talking about there's a lot of people who are very deeply into their faith that are just seeing something wrong with business as usual Catholicism. And well, they should, because literally the Catholic Church is bleeding people leaving the church. The largest growing religion is Catholics who've fallen away. He continues, "We can prattle on with spittle-fecked outrage about the audacity of those who dare reject Vatican II or who dare criticize the Novus Ordo, but it will come to nothing unless we own up to the fact that the church has failed to recognize that the anomic and nihilistic cosmos of postmodernity has laid waste to all of our standard structures of meaning and of all traditions that embodied and made real that meaning and of all the moral and spiritual weight of everything that came before 5 minutes ago." So what I think he's talking about here is there is this postmodernity world out there which has laid waste to our standard structures of meaning. Even today in our culture, we can't even tell you what it means to be male and female anymore. Any structures of meaning that we had, the understanding that our rights come from God, all of this is disappearing before our very eyes. And so people are grasping for what is real. He continues, "The church has failed to even notice and therefore to acknowledge that modern Catholics in the West are drowning with a slow gurgling death in the chaotic waters of modernity's hegemonic enchantments. That we live in a collective of concupiscence that enslaves us to the morbid regime of death and the allure of immorality through pleasure." So again, succinctly describing our modern culture. We are enslaved to pleasure in our culture. Think about, everything from, our homes and our sofas and our couches and our electric warmed seats. We crave comfort and pleasure in our culture. Think about the pornography industry, which is just $1 billion industry in this country. Our fear of death, our fear of any type of pain, our over-reliance upon drugs in our nation. He continues, "The church has failed to recognize that all the ultimates have been killed as effective realities by the mammon and Moloch of modernity and have been replaced with an endless panoply of penultimate counterfeits. The church has failed to recognize the abyss that Ratzinger outlines." He's talking about a quote of Pope Benedict a little bit early in his article. "But this abyss that outlines, which has now been opened up below us, into which we feel inexorably drawn as we flail our arms about desperately trying to grasp hold of something, anything solid." So we've reached, and even people of faith, he quotes, St. Teresa of Lisieux earlier in this article, people of faith. Think of Mother Teresa of Calcutta. We have this dark night of the soul. Even as faithful Catholics, we know, is this all real? Even if you're going to, daily mass and everything, you question, is this all real? Is this all worth it? But then you have this whole society and culture which is moving in a direction which says, no, it's not. And look, the best you can get some pleasure if you want that. We've got some pleasure to offer you. We've got some power to offer you. This moves us to our second story here of the show, just real quick, to cover how humanity is going mad and why the church is losing her faith And so there's an attempt by some, say the more traditional Catholics, to remember to return to that which is solid, unchanging, that which is steadfast, to return to worship which is more about God than more about me. What am I getting out of Mass? Oh, I like the praise and worship music. That was beautiful. And I love praise and worship music. But it's not about you going and having a good time and listening to some great music. That's not what Mass is. It's not what worship is. Worship is about God the Father. But look, humanity is going mad. We've pushed God to the horizons, and we're just making up stuff as a culture. So we are in this world of madness, which the church refuses to call out and said, this is mad over here. We must reject it. All we hear is we must love and tolerate everything. It's like, no, we can't, because it is madness over here. And we don't love and tolerate madness. So you don't believe me? Check out Facebook Watch original series, 9 Months with Courtney Cox, former TV star from the 90s hit show Friends, which I grew up on. Should never have watched that show. My parents never should have let me watch that show, but they did. Season 3, Episode 8, Courtney chronicles a married couple, where the biological female just gave birth, but the biological female is identifying as the father, the male. And the biological male is identifying as the female, as the wife. And in this particular relationship, just having a child, guess whose breasts the child is attempting to nurse at? The biological male's breasts, who's identifying as the female as the mother. Now, the biological male breast, as we know, is not producing milk. So this poor baby, and they're talking about it in this series, is not getting the nutrients it needs because it's attempting to milk from the father's breast. And they're talking about how difficult this is. And the baby's, well, it's latching here, it's not latching there. We have gone mad. This is child abuse. They're taking a little baby. They're placing the baby on the man's breast. And the baby's not getting any milk, any sustenance. And we're chronicling it on TV, on Facebook, as if this is normal. And if dare we call this out as madness, we're the ones called the bigots. We're the ones called crazy. But this is the world and the culture we're now living in right now. And do you hear a peep of this from the pulpits? Do you hear anyone calling this out and saying, this is madness over here? It's madness which must be rejected. Or do all we get is, we must love and tolerate. We must love and tolerate. Yes, we love every person, but we cannot tolerate every idea. We don't tolerate child abuse. But that's exactly what we're doing in our culture today. But why else are Catholics grasping for some tradition? Again, I'm not a traditional Latin Mass goer, but why are some Catholics grasping at tradition? Something stable a little bit. Maybe it's because those who are attending the, again, quote unquote, normal Mass, including prominent ones, not only advocate for women to be allowed to receive abortions, but actively promote the government to pay for them. From President Biden to Nancy Pelosi, who both faithful, quote unquote, Catholics who go to Mass, practicing Catholics who go to Mass, admitting that it's a priority of theirs to end the Hyde Amendment, which ensures that our taxpayer dollars don't go to fund abortions. But right now, this week and next, the House is going to be voting on legislation which is going to repeal the Hyde Amendment so that your money as a Catholic is going to go fund abortions. And these are Catholics advocating for this. Pelosi, in fact, in her press conference just yesterday, when she was pushed on this by an EWTN reporter, says this. She quotes her Catholic faith in response to the question. A devout Catholic and a mother of 5 and 6 years, I feel that God blessed my husband and me with our beautiful family, 5 children in 6 years, almost to the day. She continues, it's not up to me to dictate that that's what other people should do. And the funding of abortion and Medicaid, it's an issue of fairness and justice for poor women in our country. Now, never mind the ridiculous statement that because she's a Catholic and had 5 children, that gives her the right to advocate for other children or other moms to kill their poor kids. Never mind that absolutely ridiculous statement. But this is the fruits of the church, which has gone along with the culture. They have produced, this church, which has gone along with the culture, have produced some of the culture's leading advocates of the culture of death. Let me say that again. The church, which has rejected tradition and embraced the culture, has produced some of the leading cultural advocates of the culture of death, including the President of the United States of America, who supports abortion on demand through all 9 months of pregnancy, and the Speaker of the House, both who claim to be faithful Catholics, but advocate for the killing of unborn children to the tune of 1 million a year in this country alone and 42 million a year worldwide in our country. And we wonder why people are grasping for truth in our culture and society today. Now, look, I'm glad that Archbishop Cordileone from San Francisco spoke up and had a very powerful statement against Nancy Pelosi's words just the other day. But statements are no longer enough. Action is required. These Catholics who are professing the faith need to be excommunicated publicly. And I don't care about the rules and regulations that say, yes, well, they're automatically this or that. Say it. If this is what the church believes, say it and say it loud and say it proud. For the sake of their souls that you are seeking to save as their bishops, whether it's Marcy Kaptur here in the Diocese of Toledo, whether it's Nancy Pelosi in San Francisco, whether it's in the Archdiocese of Washington, President Biden. It's time to say it. They cannot be a faithful Catholic and advocate for the death of innocent children. The church, which has gone along with the culture, is producing some of the leading advocates for the culture of death. Let that sink in for a moment. The leading advocates for the culture of death are coming from our pews. I think it's time to re-examine a little bit of our liturgy, our worship, our preaching, and our lack of living the faith. Let me just end with this. Mary Magdalene was a great sinner, battled great evil in her life. She encountered Christ, and she became a faithful disciple of the Lord. Such a faithful disciple, in fact, that when Jesus' closest friends, closest apostles, all but one left him at the cross, all but John, another disciple was there. And Mary, of course, Christ's mother, and Mary Magdalene to the foot of the cross, knowing her great sin, her great battles and struggles with evil. How could she abandon the Lord? How could she go anywhere else? So how can we? We must stay in the church. We must stay with the Lord. We must reform her by staying close to him and giving him all that we have, becoming the saints of the 21st century. Because the Lord needs us to be saints, and that's the only thing that's going to reform our church, is you and me becoming the saints we've been called to be. And maybe, just maybe then, as Mary was chosen then to be the evangelist to the evangelists, the first to see Christ resurrected, to run and tell the apostles then, I have seen the Lord. We, when we see the Lord coming, can announce to this world, wake up, be prepared. The Lord is coming again. We'll see you next week on The Catholic Citizen.